Welcome everyone tuning in tonight. I'm Kathy Schumann and I'm standing here in the Spanish courtyard outside the Rosen House at Caramoor, where tonight's event is taking place. This is our second live stream of the summer and what I'm particularly excited about. The topic is the 1932 opera Tom Tom, written by Shirley Graham Du Bois. If you've never heard of it, you're not alone. Although the two premiere performances at Cleveland Stadium drew an audience of 25,000 people, the opera hasn't been staged since then. The score was thought to be lost until Harvard purchased Du Bois's papers in 2001 and found the manuscript among the collection. Amid the current national conversations about racial equity and inclusion, it's an appropriate moment to explore why this happened and how many other works by Black composers may have been erased from the history of classical music as written by white people. Though we scheduled this event more than a year ago, it now feels like an even more timely discussion. And we're honored to have three wonderful artists performing excerpts from Tom Tom tonight. Markel Reed and Kyle Walker here at Caramoor, and Candice Hoyes remotely. After the excerpts, they'll join Caroline Jackson-Smith and Lucy Caplan for a panel discussion of the work, music as a form of education and activism, and some of the issues Black artists have faced in the realm of classical music. The panel will be taking questions at the end, so please send those through in the live chat on your screen. Thank you again so much for joining us, and we hope to see you again soon.
Africa. Darkness. In the darkness is heard the beating of a tom-tom. The riverbank, beside the waterfall, the sacred spot for the preparation of the victim for sacrifice. The girl is given the bath of purification. She is left alone near the bank, half in the water. She listens to the distant tom-toms. Upon the ledge above the boy has crept. He seizes her arms. You must not die. Voodoo man enters. America, only moving, shapes made dimly discerned in the darkness. Waves of anguished moans rise and fall. The clanking of chains, the lash of the whip. The voodoo man is seen drawn apart. He alone hears the faint beating of a tom-tom. Lifting his shackled hands, he speaks.
Firelight river, where are thy gods? Where are thy gods? Where are thy gods? tongue beating, somewhere in the vastness of the jungle, never ceasing, like the beating of my aching heart. I am thy priest, fashioned to serve thee. No other gods will I have.
In that moment is heard the rapid beating of a military drum, the march of many feet, a bugle call, and from over the hills comes the strains of John Brown's body. It's freedom. Within the swamps, the voodoo man stands to one side. The girl can be seen running down through the glen.
doing back in Africa? Twisted by the greedy jaws. We have been less than beasts that roam the jungles, less than the sands, less than the crawling worms. They can feel the sun and feel the rivers we forget so far away.
Harlem of today, the cabaret. On the cleared floor is a tap dancer. Waiters hurry from table to table. People come and go. When the applause for the dancer has died away, the music falls into a slower rhythm, and the spot prepares for the entrance of the girl.
The folks are waiting and the music's beating low. No hesitating in those drums. The world time to sigh, no time to say goodbye, no time to mourn, to be alone. The bands are playing, folks are swaying, no time for flowers, no idle hours, no time to sit and think, no time for friends, no day that ends with just the sun a-sinking and the sighing of the wind, no time. They tell me somewhere there's a river. They tell me somewhere there's a moon. Maybe you have seen the moonlight shining on the trees. Maybe you have sailed upon the rivers.
Out from the crowd springs a cabaret dancer in African costume. He raises his spear and sinks it into the voodoo man's chest. For one instant, a startled look crosses the face of the black man. He doesn't understand. But the mother does not heed. She faces the mob.
You kill him, fools, blind clods of earth, sniveling cowards, grinning and fawning as you shirk from work and dancing to the pulling of a string. This man had a dream. What do you know of dreams? This man had a vision. What do you know of visions? He saw a race of people black and strong. He saw them claiming Africa for their own. He saw the jungle cleared. He saw the marshes dried. He saw the desert blooming forth in flower, and this nation rise like an eagle. He has failed, and now you kill him. Let him alone, that he might die in peace.
The voodoo man has been feebly attempting to beat the tom-tom. Several now rush forward to take the stick, but the boy steps forward.
It does not
Well, here we are in the virtual world. So I think you saw me introduce the program. I'm Caroline Jackson Smith. You've been listening to Tom Tom, an opera by Shirley Graham Du Bois, first performed and last performed in 1932 in Cleveland, Ohio, while Shirley Graham Du Bois was a student at Oberlin Conservatory. I'm here at Oberlin where I teach, so Shirley Graham Du Bois has a very, very special meaning for us. A group of faculty here have started a whole initiative to recenter her work, beginning with a trip to Ghana, where she is buried next to her husband, W.E.B. Du Bois. She was honored and feted in Ghana. Both of them were activists in the United States who eventually were exiled. For Dr. Du Bois, it was the end of his life. And so she really pioneered the sense of a global African diasporan politics that was informed by her being an artist. So at this time, when we are finally foregrounding Black Lives Matter in such a powerful way, she is really the artist for us to come back to and to inspire us. I had asked earlier for the virtual clapping for our wonderful musicians. I'm going to tell you all their names in just a minute. We would like to welcome you also as part of this discussion. There is a chat function where you can go to ask a question. But first, we'll hear from our panelists. And I wanted to just say in the audience is someone who's working with me on the opera, Dr. Courtney Savali Andrews, our musical director, who's helping to interpret this original handwritten score with a libretto written in. And when Dr. Lucy Caplan speaks in a few minutes, hopefully she'll tell you how she discovered the manuscript in the archives at Harvard. So what we have for Tom Tom is this beautiful original script penned by Shirley Graham Du Bois herself, never translated or published in any other form. And as I said before, never performed in full since 1932. So at Oberlin, we are working toward a full production. We hope it's going to be in fall of 21. Everyone knows how the world is going now. We'll see how that unfolds. But Dr. Courtney Savali Andrews will be doing the music with me then. And Daniel Spearman, I hope, is in the audience too, who's also been helping us to interpret the music on the Oberlin side of things. So let me introduce our panel. Let me introduce the artists first, but then I'm going to ask Dr. Caplan to speak first. Our artists are Markel Reed, baritone, native of Charlotte, North Carolina. He has performed many concerts and recitals across the United States, Canada, and Europe. He was a member of the Utah Opera Resident Artist Program. He is an interpreter of Mozart, French, and bel canto composers. He has worked with the University of Kentucky Opera Program and also has performed with a collaboration of theaters in Utah. Candice Hoyes, soprano, joining us from New York City. NPR called her an artist come activist, and that is a perfect description for her multi-genre artistic work and her commitment to social causes and centering of Black lives and all that entails. She will be releasing a brand new single called Zora's Moon very shortly. It's part of her mostly self-penned album, which she's working on. She's a 2020 winner of the New York City Women's Fund for Film, Music, and Media. She's a graduate of Harvard in Sociology and Black Studies. She has performed across every musical genre. She has a long association with Caramoor. She's an alumna of the Bel Canto Young Artist Program. She also has recently done a feminist performance lecture series for Jazz at Lincoln Center and CUNY. Kyle Walker on piano is a strong advocate for social equality and focusing the relationship between traditional Western repertoire and the repertoire of living worldwide composers, many of whom he collaborates with. He this season he's performed in the Color of Music Festival and has had a solo tour of the East and West Coasts and has also performed at Lincoln Center. He's a member of the Dream Unfinished Activist Orchestra and currently has a solo performance project entitled Bach to Black Notes. So those are your artists. And now, before we hear from them, I'd like to introduce Dr. Lucy Caplan. Lucy is really the reason why a lot of us are doing this work right now. As an undergraduate student at Harvard, she discovered this score, and she's gone on to receive her PhD from Yale in American and African American Studies. She is an interdisciplinary historian of music and culture in the United States. Her dissertation focused on African Americans redefining the genre of opera. And she's currently teaching at Harvard. She's a recipient of the 2016 Rubin Prize for Music Criticism. She's already had quite a number of essays published. And her work really has been an inspiration and foundation for me and for this growing community of tom-tom devotees and artists. So at this point, I'm going to ask Lucy if she would tell you a little bit more about the opera and maybe help to contextualize the selections that you just heard.
Absolutely. So thank you so much, Caroline, Professor Jackson-Smith, for your incredible work bringing this opera to life at Oberlin. And thank you also to the artists who are part of our presentation today. It is so special to hear this music brought to life after knowing that it had spent so many years unheard. It's just really kind of a wonderful thing to witness and to be part of. So as Caroline mentioned, I first came to know this opera several years ago, really just while looking for a topic to write about for a research paper. And I ended up getting really lucky in finding this piece that was just phenomenal, that just totally fascinated me, both for the kind of content and magic and kind of complexity of it, but also the fact that it had gone unheard for so long. And I was curious about why that was. Why had this opera, which, as Caroline mentioned, had attracted an audience of 25,000 people at its premiere, disappeared and become something that we no longer hear on operatic stages today? And we can certainly talk about kind of some possible answer to that question later, but I'll also just contextualize why I think this piece is so kind of revolutionary and important, and contextualize some of the excerpts that you just heard. So the opera is in 3 acts. Each of one takes place in a different time and place. The first act is in a pre-modern West African setting. The second act brings us to the American South in 1865, and the third act brings us to Harlem around 1930. But within that narrative, Graham takes on this kind of incredibly ambitious narrative and also adds her own layers of musical and narrative complexity to it. So these characters are constantly torn between the past and the present, between Africa and the United States, between generations, between religious traditions. They are kind of at the nexus of all these different types of traditions and ways of thinking, and we see them struggling with their kind of politics and their social commitments and their families throughout this work, as you've seen the artists bring to life today. Graham was writing this opera right after the kind of apex of the Harlem Renaissance, when a whole variety of Black artists were thinking about what it meant to engage with Africa and African history, what it meant to think of themselves as part of a diasporic people, and how art could be a site for politics and for social change. So she's working in this really kind of complex milieu of different artists thinking about how to bring their work to life and how to kind of honor their history through art. And what fascinates me is that she chose to do this through the form of opera, which allowed her to do this really kind of innovative, collaborative work where she was using tools more often associated with the European canon to tell this really kind of revolutionary story of African diasporic history. So I will stop there, and I think now we're going to hear from the artists about some of their experience engaging with this music.
Thank you, Lucy. I just want to say one little bit more about what you heard. As Lucy said, we heard a selection from each of the 3 acts. The first act happens entirely in Africa in a ceremony that the lead character, Voodoo Man, who is a priest and a leader in his society, is leading, which involves a young girl, whom Candice embodied, who is to be sacrificed. A young boy interrupts the sacrifice because he loves her, and that opens the door for slavers to come into the community, and it ends with the people being dragged into slavery. In Act Two, a lot of the music is structured around the spirituals, and we see the people now immersed in slavery, but also we introduce the tension between the Christian church and the traditional African gods whom Voodoo worships. And it ends with a virtual representation of the Civil War and the freeing of the slaves, and they're about to revolt when they realize they've been freed. Third act goes ahead to 1930 in the time of Marcus Garvey, and it involves a Marcus Garvey-like movement of back to Africa, and it becomes a very sophisticated argument about if people should return to Africa, and if so, why? Is it for the kind of colonizer dream of riches, or is it for what Voodoo Man advocates? And you heard in that beautiful aria, he advocates for, as you heard, a vision of people Black and strong claiming Africa as their own. So that is what makes this work, I think, so prescient and so powerful right at this time when we are thinking even more deeply than ever about what it means to be African people and what does it mean for the world to support and recognize the role and the dignity and the incredible sacrifices and accomplishments of people of African descent. So having said that, I'm going to go to Kyle first, our pianist. Kyle, this is the second time I've heard Kyle interpret a part of the opera. He was also in a program at National Sawdust in New York that Lucy helped to curate. So I'm going to go to Kyle first and ask him, as a performer, and I have to say, in a sense, you're being an orchestrator too. How do you approach a work like this, which has gone unheard for so long, and how has your experience been entering into this world of Shirley Graham Du Bois and Tom Tom?
Yeah, so anytime that you are interpreting a work that hasn't been performed, almost never really in this case, you really have to come at it from a historical perspective in terms of knowing what was happening not only at the time when the composer was actually writing this piece, but also what was happening at the time in the actual opera, you know, so you're kind of putting yourself in the actual scene. And I think from that, you therefore sort of extract some of the elements, in this case, the drums, you know. So as an orchestrator, which I think I kind of have to be in this case, you know, I have to figure out how to make these 88 keys on the piano sound like however many piece orchestra. And one of the interesting things about that is that piano is really a percussion instrument. So in that respect, we have sort of an advantage when it comes to imitating a percussive instrument like a tom-tom. But then you have this register thing to figure out. You know, do I do lots of rhythmic things in the top register of the piano or in the bottom register of the piano or in the mid-range of the piano? There's lots of different sonorities possible with the instrument, and really, when it comes to a piano reduction, there's not really much guidance when it comes to percussion instruments, you know, instruments that don't have a strict pitch to them. So, you know, my interpretation was that the tom-tom should be really quite low and, you know, really almost bubbling up from something underneath the surface. So I think at the beginning of this piece, you hear that, you know, right from the opening, bum, 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 boom. It sort of comes out from the bottom. And then at the very last excerpt that Markel and I did, you hear that again, sort of going back into the distance and back almost to where it came from, which I think regarding the actual message of the piece is synonymous with the text, which is, you know, going back to the motherland, more or less. So I think that's one element regarding percussion, but then you have lots of other things to worry about, like voicing. When you have a multi-piece orchestra, you have instruments that really can weave in and out throughout the register with each other. So, when it comes to the piano, you can't really weave in and out very easily with two hands. If you imagine something like a harpsichord, which has multiple keyboards, multiple manuals, and really, if one hand plays middle C, the other hand could technically play the same note, or at least write around that same register very easily by just playing it on another keyboard. On piano, we can't really do that. So unfortunately, sometimes we have to leave certain things out. And so that leaves us for another sort of thing to have to figure out, what is the most important sonority here? And most importantly, in this situation, what does the singer, the soloist, need in order to interpret the text in the most genuine way possible?
Maybe that's a good segue to ask our singers what it was like for them to enter into this world of tom-tom. And I did want to just tag on to what you said, Kyle, by saying to the audience, for example, there would be 6 timpani in the original design of the score and a full orchestra. And often we found that certain characters also were defined by certain instruments. Bassoon was a favorite instrument for the Voodoo Man character. So nobody yet has really heard this full orchestral treatment, although we're kind of working on it at Oberlin. But let me go to Candice and ask you, as a singer, what was your experience of entering this material and illuminating it for us?
Thank you. I'm always entering a piece of music with a freshness and a very personal approach. I think, especially if you talk about opera, there's a vocal tradition that's been going on for generations, crossing continents. And so I think the most powerful place for any artist to enter, especially I feel this for myself, is from the personal perspective. I also have, as you were sharing with everyone, I have a deeply rooted historical perspective that is a basis of my informing my work, but I'm able to kind of draw from a combination of both. And I think personally, I'm an archivist as well, and that has always fueled my passion for works which require of me to come to the work. I don't really like to speak about a work as forgotten because that really implicates forgotten by whom. And I don't run my musical taste by that gaze. I think more, what does the music take of, ask of me? What do I need to understand and explore? So I found it a really fun challenge. When I mentioned I'm an archivist, a few years ago when I realized that I'm an interdisciplinary musician and I started working more broadly across not only in classical music, but jazz and soul and musical theater and other forms, I started doing more archival research, and I discovered some very rare songs that Duke Ellington wrote for soprano voice, classical soprano. Sopranos who did not find ease in moving through the classical world and found more fullness of their experience in his band. And so he wrote these vocalises that I decided to record, not knowing how to record. And I think that my curiosity and my commitment to making my own monument for works is a part of also why I like archival works. So I guess it's like a combination of forces for me. And this one, it was fun to work with in this collaborative format and to have Caramoor as a part of the conversation and to know that we were going to meet a live audience. So we're glad to see all of you at the same time. That, like, not only hearing live what we were going to do, but being able to have it as a communal experience, was always a good inspiration point for us.
It's an interesting thing that you use the word monument. Did you realize you just said monument in this?
Oh, yes.
But maybe you could just elaborate on, how this living work.
I'm very conscious. Yes, I know what I said.
Yes, I would wonder if you could elaborate just a little bit on how this living work is the kind of monument that is so important. right now when there's tension over other kinds of monuments.
Absolutely. And it's been expressed in so many ways. I want to come back, Carolyn, into the text to explain my perspective. This text is a lens, and then I shine my spiritual musical light through the text. That's how I experience, because the work of an archivist and a musician is a lot solitary. Then we have this joyful celebration where we all come and do a live stream, and we do something very new and experimental at Caramoor. Before that, it's very private. And yes, I think it's monumental to record archival works. And as an opera singer, you're not really told that you must take a song collection and record it before a label signs you, or maestro or maestra, somebody tells you that you're ready. And I decided, as a matter of my legacy, I'm first generation American. I'm so many things. I wanted to make something that would be eternal, and I am aware of the legacy of the Du Boises and Zora Neale Hurston and many other artists who did not maybe fix in time their work in the way that I'm able to, and so I don't take that lightly, and I would rather pour myself into learning something new than to throw that chance that was paid for me dearly by the generations before, just throw it away. I would rather try. And so my recordings are monuments in a way.
I think that's beautiful. Because this play begins with an African ritual, and in African descended systems, that living ritual is monument, it equals monument. That just seems so timely. Hi, Markel, how are you doing? You got to explore Voodoo Man and the Elder, and I'm wondering how was your journey into Tom Tom?
So as I approached the score, I first took a few good readings of the libretto, and it's the first time I read through it, I actually had to call someone and decompress because it's so rich, it's so thick. The setting, the three acts are set in 3 different times. However, the Voodoo Man is kind of constant. Everyone else seems to move forward in time. He's still trying to maintain he's trying to maintain the rituals, the traditions that he has been educated in, that he has led his people with, and moving from that into the music, everything that at least most of the excerpts that I've had are very declamatory when it comes to the Voodoo Man, and he doesn't really show a lot of softness in most of what he has to say. Even when he's talking about the gods, it's the gods need me to help to help further what they want to do, what their mission is, what they want for us. And because of those traditions, he gets stuck. And even when he wants to go back to Africa, he gets taken advantage of by a character who we don't see today. It's a tradesman, a salesman who hijacks his idea of going back to Africa and sells stocks to people who aren't actually trying to go back for the purposes that the Voodoo Man wants, for the traditions. It's to make money. It's to, I won't use that word, but to go to the land and take all of its resources and leave nothing for the people that are there. And I had to figure out why, for myself, Voodoo Man is stuck, why he can't show that softness until he's dying. You know, he's very sincere. I don't believe that he is trying to control the people. I think that he is trying to lead them into the light that he was led into and stay in that light, not this light of of the white man, which is kind of what he was talking about, especially in the second act. The spirituals that the enslaved Africans are singing, he kind of reviles the people and tells them, like, you are brainwashed. This is not our people. This is not of our land. What you are doing is forsaking and forgetting who we are. And I guess that speaks very deeply to me, because in the last few years, I've taken it upon myself to learn more about my own heritage, being a black man. Not that I've never felt like or realized that I was a black man, but to really know what my identity is, to understand that it is a very complex identity, especially being here in America, and how to lead people, how to educate myself so that I can properly share with people how lost we are in some ways. So I've definitely identified with the Voodoo Man in that way, finding that softness in myself to translate that into the score for him was difficult, especially with the tessitura in which the piece is written. It is very high, but that doesn't mean that it's one note. That doesn't mean that it's one emotion. He still has a lot under the surface, and so that's what I had to go to the libretto to figure out who he was and how to put that into the music.
Yeah, it's interesting when you look at the whole, which you guys couldn't hear this tonight in the audience, but there's a character, the boy, who's also a tenor, so he's singing in a different register, who kind of is a counterpoint to the Voodoo Man. He also appears in every act in different forms, but he, so there's a tension between them. Sometimes he's singing in a much lighter way. He's a romantic. He's in love with the girl. So it was really interesting to hear those in tension with each other. I'm going to ask the staff there at Caramoor, are you seeing questions? I don't have the chat open, and my other program, I'm not seeing questions on it. So I don't know if there's anybody there who can kind of cue me on that.
Could I just ask you something?
Yes.
Or share something? I thought that, as an actor, it's very interesting to work with a piece that uses archetypes, man, woman, girl. And I was sharing with my colleagues that I sang today the woman and the girl at the same time. And I loved the juxtaposition, but I also thought a lot about, I take a lot of inspiration from other disciplines. So I was thinking about that Glenn Ligon series, I Am a Man. And I saw, because I was thinking about the, the archetypic centering of that. So, or expression rather. And then I researched that it was based on a Memphis sanitation worker protest. And I just thought a lot about how it kind of expresses the human experience and why someone like Graham Du Bois would want to emphasize the essential human part of the experience in a time when you're living in a segregated society. And I find that interesting. It's not to say that there's for me, that there's a general woman or essential woman experience or girl experience. It's more to say, look past the racial identity and explore explore what it would feel like to be in this person's shoes, looking through her eyes, even if you're, wherever you come from. And I thought that was really powerful. For me, I was like, oh, I understand.
It also for me is a way of her centering the collective and thinking of a people as not individualized, but as an experience. In the beginning of Act 2, the stage direction says that you literally see only shapes moving, and then they materialize into the people working in the fields. So, there's this sense that they've moved as a group experience. But I'm glad you brought up the mother and the girl, because there's a mother-daughter story that's told in each act, just as there is a romantic story told, and then the central story that's anchored by Voodoo Man, who is the only character who is literally named throughout the piece. Since I'm not sure about questions right now, I'm just going to go back and ask Kyle and anybody else. Shirley Graham understood music as a form of education and activism. How does your own artistic practice relate to your social concerns and political commitments? And I say that also because in an earlier conversation with some of the artists, we really wanted to honor and highlight the journeys of young artists right now, and especially living with all the incredible forces that are at work now. So I was wondering, maybe go back to you, Kyle, because I know there's some really incredible things you're doing, and maybe ask each of you to relate to Shirley Graham in her passion for activism, education, and music as threaded together.
Well, I think it starts with curiosity. I mean, I think for everybody, no matter what your background is, what your color is, we all sort of have a curiosity about something. And similar to Markel, you know, in the last number of years, I think for myself, I've been very curious about not only my heritage, my ancestry, where I came from, but really why. I think Lucy also, you know, used the question why. Why have these works been lost? And where are these works? What are the works? I mean, there are just so many questions that I believe have been, you know, unanswered for a long time, and many we wouldn't even know to ask. So for me, as a pianist, I mean, there's so much great repertoire out there as a pianist. And this is aside from any sort of operatic material, but just solo piano material. There is just an abundance of repertoire that you could spend an entire life, you know, researching and working on works that have and are currently being performed all the time. But as an audience member, I found it really odd that, you know, unless you're a person that's like actively studying the instrument, it's not so interesting to always hear the same pieces performed by maybe different people. But I personally wanted to find something that really spoke more to me as an individual. And so I think when I was in the midst of graduating from my master's, I was trying to figure out, you know, what is it that really ignites me? And it's this idea that like we have sort of been stripped of this other side of classical music and of music in general, but I say specifically classical music because in music schools and music conservatories, I mean, the extent of the African diaspora in terms of classical music that you receive is probably maybe some knowledge of William Grant Still, and who is sort of deemed as the you know, father of African American music. I mean, it's fine that he has that name, but there's so many other composers.
Yeah.
Luckily,
as a matter of fact, Dr. Courtney Savali Andrews, whom I mentioned, who's out there somewhere in the audience, is preparing a course that's going to be a year-long course next year at Oberlin Conservatory and College about the history of Black composers. And she just told me today that she's going all the way back before the 18th century, coming to the present. And a lot of the Black composers of the 19th century actually attended Oberlin. And so that's our own legacy. And I just wanted to share also, Kyle, that we felt called by Shirley Graham. I'm going to call her Shirley Graham for now because that's who she was when she wrote the opera. But honestly, we feel an ancestral calling that she is actually speaking to us and saying, this is the time to unleash my voice again. And we have installed a plaque in the Conservatory of Music, which is a very, very historically white, Western European focused musical institution. So her plaque hangs in the library now, as well as in the center in Ghana. Markel, did you want to add something? Now I see the audience questions. So maybe after Markel, after you share, we'll see what we can answer for the audience.
Sure. So during this time of the pandemic, there's more time to explore, there's more time to research. And one of the things that I have had the opportunity to take advantage of is teaching. And something that I am trying to implement, especially because of the students that I am educating. Most of them are younger, but all of them are Black. And one of the things I really want them to have is that background of who we are as a people through the music that we ourselves produced. So I am trying to, it may be small, but it's something that I'm growing, of assigning them pieces by African American composers, also talking to them about the history of those pieces, making sure that they understand, having them do a little research. Even if they're 9 years old, they can still learn, they can still research, even at their level. So it's something I'm very passionate about teaching. It's wonderful to be able to come back to it and to have hungry people who not only want to learn how to sing, not only want to improve their voices, but also are interested in what makes them special, like their actual identity, as opposed to just being an American. Of course, that is, part of it. But
that's a powerful idea to take from Graham, who integrated so many of her own identity elements because she was raised by a minister. She went to Paris when she was young. She met African people when she was young. She continued to form her identity in relationship to many musics. And so it sounds like you are really conscious of that too. I'm going to take a couple of these questions that are quick for me to answer. I'm going to throw a couple to Lucy, and then I wanted to just come back to one, which is how did the artist rehearse, and see if Candice wanted to add anything too. So the first one was, how did the work get commissioned? When Shirley Graham came to Oberlin, she met the people at Caramoor House, not Caramoor, but Karamu, which is the oldest continuously producing institution of work by and about Black artists. It was a settlement house then, and it was founded by 2 Oberlin alums. And so they were talking with her about writing something for them. And they had already produced work by Langston Hughes, Zora Neale Hurston. Langston Hughes had been in residence there. So they were part of a big conversation of artists and activists of that moment. They realized that her vision was too big for their organization. So they connected her with the Cleveland Stadium Opera Company, who then commissioned her. And they did 3 operas that summer, and they were actually interested in a kind of what we might call today cultural diversity. I think Aida was one of them. Lucy actually knows the complete answer to that. And I'm going to go back to Lucy in a minute because there's a question for me that I can answer pretty efficiently, I hope. Well, hold on a second. I would like Professor Jackson Smith to say something. Let me see. Okay, we're good. Actually, I think I will throw this back to Lucy because this question is, will Professor Caplan speak a little bit more on the idea of African Americans defining opera, or redefining traditional operas, writing new ones? And also, they're asking, how did Graham's marriage to Du Bois affect her music? Did he inspire her, support her, etc.? And also, third one for you, Lucy, what were Shirley Graham's musical influences? I think you're good on that topic. So did you get your 3? The first one was your subject, redefining opera, or defining it through the African-American experience, her marriage, and then musical influences.
All right, I'll take those one at a time. So first, thinking about African-Americans and redefining the genre of opera. In my own research, I focus on what I like to call the period before Marian Anderson and before Porgy and Bess. We often think of those as kind of starting points in a tradition of Black artists' engagement with opera, and I want us to think of them instead as endpoints or kind of culminations of this existing, flourishing tradition. So we can look at a ton of different examples. There are composers like Graham. There's a composer named Harry Lawrence Freeman who's gotten a lot of attention, who wrote more than 20 operas while living in Harlem, as he put it, living a mile from the Metropolitan Opera House, yet doing totally different work than they were doing there. And I think, and there were critics writing about opera in the African-American press. There were singers kind of taking on these roles, both traveling to Europe and doing so in the US. But one image that I think is especially evocative is a scene that takes place in 1925 in the basement of what is now the Schomburg Center, which is the branch of the New York Public Library in Harlem that's dedicated to Black history and culture. And in 1925, they held a contest located in the basement there for aspiring young Black women who wanted to sing opera. And 250 women entered this contest and came and sang aria after aria, hoping to earn the opportunity to have training in opera and perhaps eventually to sing in an opera house. The kind of advertised promise was to sing at the Met. That did not happen, but I think what's even more kind of striking about this story is how it shows this kind of widespread communal community interest in this art form and suggests that there's this whole world that kind of traditional narratives of Black artists' engagement with the art form just does not include. When we only look at kind of the most famous and the most exceptional and the figures who integrated white spaces, we miss so much of the story. So that, I think, lets us kind of think about the many places that this art form has traveled and how it might continue to change even now. To move on to the next question, so...
You know what I'm going to say about Du Bois, her musical career mostly preceded her marriage to Dr. Du Bois in 1951. She moved through a career that was heavily musical influenced, heavily musically focused, to a period where she was very involved in theater, including running the Chicago unit of the WPA theater movement. And then when she went into politics, she went really heavily into national and international politics, and that was the point at which she met him. So but I think Lucy it would be great for you to say something about her musical influences, because that's an important part of what makes the opera unique.
Sure. So her musical influences were really kind of kaleidoscopic in nature. She was looking at all these different art forms. Actually, Candice, hearing you speak about your own kind of journey through all these different genres and forms reminded me a lot of Shirley Graham and her own life and experiences. So her father, as I think Caroline mentioned earlier, was a minister. So she grew up kind of immersed in the music of the Black church. She also studied piano. She used to make some extra money as a teenager playing silent film scores in Washington State, where she lived. And then she went on to study classical music at a variety of institutions. She studied in Paris. Her brother was also a missionary who worked in Liberia for 4 years and learned a lot about West African folk music while he was there, and then translated that knowledge back to her. So in the opera and Tom Tom, we can see a lot of that influence as well. She also studied at Oberlin. She earned her undergraduate and graduate degrees in musicology. And she ended up actually writing a master's thesis called The Survivals of Africanism in Modern Music. So almost like the academic equivalent of the work that she was doing in Tom Tom, asking how the African presence had this enduring, lasting influence in African American music and culture. So just a kind of shockingly, amazingly wide range of influences on her music that I think we can hear in the excerpts that we heard this evening.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm going to collapse as we kind of wind down 3 interlocking questions for the artists. And one of them was, how did you rehearse for this? Which is a wonderful story, because I'm sure most of you in the audience know that Caramoor planned this as a big live program, and that this is a really creative adaptation, and we're really happy that they decided to do the program and that let us figure out how to do it. So one is about, how did you rehearse it? Another question is, what was it like to prepare these pieces while our world is currently in the midst of the Black Lives Matter movement? And I think those are the 2 that I would throw to the artists. And I'll probably just take one more before we let you go, good people. So, how was it to rehearse it, and what was it like to prepare these pieces while our world is currently in the midst of the Black Lives Matter movement?
I'll start. So I would say that to rehearse these pieces, we most of all called upon the 10,000 hours you put in as a musician before you take on a piece. If anyone's ever heard of that concept, that to get very good at something or excellent or distinctive, you have to put in 10,000 hours of work. So we had really pointed and like full conversations and we did some musical work on our own, and we were just collaborative and confident, I think, in our choices, and use the gifts of video and communication, which you use as a singer and a pianist. So that was not daunting for us, although we did work on it. And I want to spend more time, or my time at least, speaking to every young soprano who's lined up in a basement, who's on this Zoom, and every artist, every young Black artist, whether you're studying piano. I started studying piano when I was 6 because my mother felt it was important for me to do. My grandparents introduced me to jazz. They immigrated from Jamaica. They had no formal musical training. My grandmother sewed this. She was a designer and she worked for a label, and someone else's name is on there, but I know that she designed this. She gave it to my mother and she gave it to me. What I want to tell you is that keep going through this, not just through the pandemic, but the business was not easy before the pandemic either. You have a richness of stories and you carry a multitude of experiences. And I encourage you all, as I did, to take your time, wander around across genre if the spirit calls you. Write your own pieces, produce your own pieces, put out your own pieces. It is an act of joy, it is an act of protest, it is an act of resistance. And the work that I'm doing that is next, Zora's Moon, is something inspired by Zora Neale Hurston and her archives. And my spirit wouldn't leave me until I wrote this song. So stick with it and stay with it. We need your voice. And that's what I want to say. And if you ever have questions, you can reach out to the three of us on any of the ways. And this is a larger community. So thank you. If it's my last thing to say, thank you, Caramoor, for facilitating and expanding this community.
Thank you, Candice. Kyle or Markel, would you like to respond as we kind of wrap up here?
Yeah.
What was it like to rehearse, and what's it like doing this in the moment of the Black Lives Matter movement's fullness?
So, in terms of rehearsing and preparing, it was definitely a little more challenging having something, at least at the beginning, that we didn't have any. Nowadays, we have YouTube, we have Apple Music, we have all these things that help us to learn music. And to really go back to the basics, like counting out beats and, looking at intervals, in terms of actually rehearsing and learning the music, it helped me in a really big way to like kind of go back to those basics. And then reaching out to Kyle and realizing that some of the pieces actually came in different keys, figuring out which one had the right character for what this space was supposed to be or is. I had to do a little soul searching just to figure out, like, do I want to be in the rafters or do I want to be in the basement? Because there wasn't really an option, between the two. But it was in rehearsing it and learning it, I learned more about myself, and then going from the music to the text and putting those things together, I definitely had a little bit of a come to Jesus moment when it came to this character Voodoo Man and what he is saying and how he is saying it during this time when so many murders have recently happened, and there's a lot of anger that I've had. And some of that ended up translating into the piece inadvertently. And I had to go back and filter out the things that I didn't want to be there because I wanted to be effective in conveying what Shirley Graham Du Bois or Shirley Graham wrote. And then I can put myself into it as well, but I wanted to make sure that I tried to maintain what I felt was the integrity of this piece, so that I didn't put so much of myself that you no longer saw the story that was being told.
Oh, thank you. That's powerful.
Yeah,
Kyle, do
I
you
could.
have a quick word for us before we part for the evening?
Sure. So I'll just talk about what Markel was just speaking about for 1 second, and then I'll say something more about the rehearsing part of it. But I think earlier we were talking slightly about the monument thing, and this is part of, I think, what a monument is understanding that it isn't necessarily about you, but that it's about finding what it is that caused the composer to create this amazing work, and finding a way to bring that back to life. And this is a transition into the rehearsing part of it, because this is not an edited edition of any sort. Really, it's very handwritten, and there could be some discrepancies even about, is that a sharp or a natural, or there's some notes there that are sort of questionable, just given the fact of how it was written and how long ago it was written and the way that it's been archived over time. And so in terms of the rehearsing process, like Candice was saying, we have to sort of rely on those thousands of hours of practicing that we sort of trust and rely on, and the rest sort of comes down to your intuition, which is something that you rely on in any live situation. In any sort of live performance, that's what it comes down to, because anything can happen live. You don't have to rehearse it, or you do have to rehearse it, but it might not always happen how you rehearse it. And that's something that I think was present both in Markel and I's live presentation as well as Candice and I's videos. Candice did things that I was not expecting her to do, and I had to work with that and make it like something that I didn't even imagine. And I think the result came out way better than what I by myself intended.
Wow, that is
think
beautiful. There was one question that I couldn't answer because I'm not on the staff of Caramoor, but it was, why did Caramoor pick this? So I will answer that, not with an answer, but by saying this is a call that I think Caramoor is issuing to themselves and other institutions to be sure that this kind of work is done more. And I will leave you by saying that Shirley Graham Du Bois was one of the most passionate people I've ever read about. She pursued her goals through living in Egypt, China, Ghana. She never gave up. Whatever forces were against her, she found a new way to express herself as an artist, as an activist, and that is a call to all of us. So thank you, Caramoor. Thank you, Candice, Markel, and Kyle, and Lucy. And I'm going to clap for you. Thank you so much.